my family was involved with the MMF from the beginning of my life.
Tonight, an independent group says they're demystifying the Manitoba Métis Federation.
So these challenges that result in our women being murdered and being abducted and going missing are intergenerational.
A parliamentary committee hears about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
I've had elders tell me personally, that our trailers are sitting on unmarked graves.
And an addictions counselor teaching facility adds unmarked graves to a litany of concerns. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Gerald Antoine is the Assembly of First Nations lead delegate to Rome and Northwest Territories regional chief. He says immediate healing supports are needed for survivors and families of residential schools. This is what he's going to be saying when he goes to Rome. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs has more on that.
On September the 20th, 1987, he made a 5-hour visit to Chiliquin, Fort Simpson, Denendeh, Northwest Territory.
Gerald Antoine remembers the first time he met the Pope. At the time, he was chief of Chiliquin First Nation. Now, as Dene National Chief, he's a delegate traveling to the Vatican City this weekend.
There's this dark truth that needs to be told truthfully. And so we're looking at and working with each other as to how and who is going to be sharing those messages.
Chief Antoine is a residential school survivor. He was forced to attend Sacred Heart Mission in Fort Simpson and WT, and says the trip to seek an apology from the Pope for cultural genocide and trauma inflicted by the Catholic Church is a collective mission and personal journey.
It's not about me, it's about our people. Are there as a messenger. We're there as a family, and that we have families back here that need to be visited and to be apologized to, and look at how we need to move forward. The leadership at the time, when they had a private audience with the Pope here over on the teepee podium, and that's where he was also informed about the concerns that our people had about residential school.
Chief Antoine says he's confident in a papal apology.
It also has to be involved with the government, because it was the government or the state and the church, they're both involved. And so that's, this is where it needs to come from. And I know that with the church, there's going to be a degree of that. With the federal government, there has been apology. However, their action today doesn't even come close to that apology heard a few years ago.
First Nations, Inuit, and Métis delegates will share personal testimonies of the intergenerational legacy of residential schools next week, ahead of a visit from the Pope to Canada, scheduled later for this year.
So I called out to the families there, to call out to their families and relatives to help each other to prepare for that.
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Chiliquin First Nation.
Métis Nation Saskatchewan representatives will have the ear of the Pope and plan to tell him stories of Métis survivors of residential schools. Some are already on their way to Rome as part of that larger Métis National Council delegation, which is part of the larger Indigenous delegation that's going. They say that they welcome the opportunity to have these stories heard. Leanne Sanders reports.
Elders Antoinette Lafleur and Émile Janvier are on their way to Rome to see the Pope. Janvier will deliver a prayer during the visit in his Dene language and ultimately hopes for an apology from the Catholic Church. In an emailed statement, he said, "We talk about truth and reconciliation. Who do you reconcile with without sorry?" The MNS says the Métis experience in residential schools has been largely forgotten and ignored, particularly by the federal government. Survivors and families from the Isla La Crosse and Timber Bay residential schools were denied settlements and apologies that other survivors have received. MNS Vice President Michelle Leclerc says Saskatchewan has some of the oldest residential schools in Canada.
Isla La Crosse is one of the biggest Métis schools that were run by the Catholic Church for about 125 years. So we're talking 6 generations of trauma. And mostly Métis kids went to those schools, right? And so it was no different than an Indian residential school. In terms of if the kids didn't show up to the school, the priest would be on the boat with the RCMP officer and those kids would be going to schools.
A memorandum of understanding was signed in 2019 between the MNS, the federal government, and a committee representing the survivors of the Isla La Crosse school. It stated that being left out of the survivor settlement scheme has had an impact on the entire Métis community in Saskatchewan. Work on the memorandum items is ongoing, but Leclerc says Métis people just want acknowledgement.
The Métis story is always sort of like here, and then the First Nation story is here in the Inuit. So we're really wanting the acknowledgement that our survivors went through the same kinds of trauma that children in Indian residential schools went through. If we looked at the unmarked graves, we don't know how many of those kids were First Nations or Métis, but that experience was together.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
We want to hear what you think will come of this Indigenous delegation to the Vatican, or what should come of it. Here's how you can continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see all of our latest stories. A night shift guard at an RCMP detachment in northern Manitoba has been charged with sexual assault. According to RCMP, a civilian guard in Little Grand Rapids, a remote community in northern Manitoba, allegedly entered a holding cell and offered a 39-year-old woman alcohol. He also allegedly touched her inappropriately several times before leaving the cell. The woman, who was being detained overnight, reported it to police officers the morning of March 20th. The guard was charged the following day. Another cell was occupied at the time of the alleged offense. It's not known if that person will be a witness in this matter. The guard is scheduled to appear in court on the sex assault charge in July. A parliamentary committee is examining intimate partner and domestic violence in Canada. Today, the Standing Committee on the Status of Women heard from British Columbia's Moose Hide campaign. It was co-founded by Paul Lacerte and his daughter Raven back in 2011. They'd been hunting near the Highway of Tears and decided to make moose hide pins in recognition of violence against Indigenous women. When asked why violence is so prevalent against our women, Lacerte had this to say.
So these challenges that result in our women being murdered and being abducted and going missing are intergenerational, they're systemic, they're statutory and regulatory, and includes, and you know, one of my late recommendations here, it includes, you know, systemic barriers inside our policing systems, including within the RCMP, for Indigenous women to be seen through a lens of respect and equality.
The lawyer for convoy organizer Tamara Leach says a Glad Do report is going to be part of her case. APTN News obtained a copy of Leach's Alberta Métis card and certificate proving her indigeneity. In an email, her lawyer told us that a Glad Do report will be written if the matter proceeds to that point. Glad Do reports assist the court in delivering appropriate sentences if a person is convicted of a crime. It takes into account the unique experience of Indigenous offenders. Leach is facing multiple charges, including mischief and intimidation stemming from her involvement in the Ottawa convoy protests. New charges were laid against her and other organizers just yesterday. She is scheduled to appear in court next in April. The Manitoba Métis Federation's annual General Assembly is this weekend. Red River Echoes is a Winnipeg-based independent Métis advocacy group preemptively hosting a workshop on governance to help Métis people understand how they can make their voices heard. Amelia Fournier explains.
Brianne Lavallée-Heckert grew up immersed in Métis politics.
Because my family was involved with the MMF from the beginning of my life, it's always kind of just been part of what it meant to be Métis.
A graduate of law from McGill, she worked with other legally trained members to demystify MMF's governance structures.
Response to community and response to our own collective and how we wanted to feel empowered going into this AGA.
Around 50 people attended.
So I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started.
Lavallée-Heckert led the virtual workshop, which is now available on Red River Echo's YouTube channel. The MMF is registered as a corporation, with power concentrated at the level of the president and a board of directors. The MMF's annual General Assemblies provide an opportunity for members to vote on resolutions, but doesn't allow members to table their own. Submitting resolutions is a lengthy process for MMF members. Even if a resolution is approved at the local and regional level, the board of directors can still strike it down.
Why the choice for corporate governance? Especially considering that Métis governance has historically favored decentralized modes of leadership. So that means not vesting power into one single body that is responsible for making decisions, but instead there's wider input.
While most Red River Echoes members are card holders with the MMF, Andre Forrest, another collective member, says some Red River Echoes members chose not to renew or register with the MMF because they don't feel the Federation represents them.
If you can't understand the way that your government functions or some of the statements it makes don't feel like they represent you as a Métis person, and you're not sure how that, speaking point or that message came to exist, the feeling of connection is lost.
The collective formed in spring 2021 after President David Chartrand publicly commended the Winnipeg Police Service despite recent police shootings of Indigenous people. Red River Echoes envisions a more participatory form of government with less power concentration. Their own collective's governance structure takes the shape of a flower and has rotating leadership roles, inspired by the buffalo hunt legal structure.
There's no fixed position of leader. We have the captain model, and so we have captains and co-captains, and that's inherited from the buffalo hunts.
Lavallée-Heckert said she recognizes the opportunities and work that older generations have established, and does not want Red River Echoes to be an opposing force to the MMF, but to provide a voice within it.
It's not about taking over, it's about how can we all come together in a way that we all feel heard and empowered to participate.
Amelia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
We're going to have to go and take a commercial break, but first, here's APTN's Vancouver reporter.
Tanse, I'm Tina House. Soon, I'll be traveling to Rome, Italy with the Indigenous delegation to meet the Pope regarding truth and reconciliation and residential schools and the impacts of those schools on our people. Tune in next week for more stories on APTN National News.
Welcome back. The Nechi Institute has been helping people with addictions training for almost 5 decades. They had relocated in 2020, but they say the new location sits on top of unmarked graves. Our Edmonton reporter, Chris Stewart, explains.
The Nechi Institute Center of Indigenous Learning say that over their 50-year history, they have trained 15,000 people to help treat and counsel people with addictions. Until 2020, they shared space with the Poundmakers Lodge Treatment Centers in St. Albert, just north of Edmonton, located on the former site of the Edmonton Indian Residential School. Poundmaker expanded and Nechi was forced to use trailers on the ground. Nechi Institute CEO Marilyn Buffalo says the trailers are too small and the conditions make them unsuitable for her and her staff.
This trailer, I don't even know how old it is. It's old and moldy. It's very cold. And in the summertime, it's an impossible place to be in, to work in. Our computers need updating. We have bought computers for all our students, and Nechi is in financial disrepair right now.
Just as alarming is that she says that trailers are sitting on unmarked graves. There are reports that bodies from the Charles Council Hospital in Edmonton were brought here to be buried. The hospital performed experiments on Indigenous peoples. She also says residential school students were made to dig graves. The trauma associated with the site makes it very hard to promote healing, according to Buffalo.
I have some very important persons that went to school here. One of them is Hereditary Chief George Muldoe, that came here last year and showed my staff exactly where he buried people. And that's immediately behind our backyard here at Nechi Institute. I've had elders tell me personally, that our trailers are sitting on unmarked graves here. We need to find a new home for Nechi. We need to get out of here and be treated with an honorable respect and dignity.
Buffalo has written letters to Prime Minister Trudeau and AFN National Chief Roseanne Archibald to ask for help. She says in 2019, the AFN passed Resolution 111-2019, which calls for the AFN Chief and Executive Council to support mental health addictions and work with organizations like the Nechi Institute.
This is unacceptable, totally, and Canada needs to be called, which is why I, as the CEO of Nechi Institute, have taken a position to the top, to our national chief, Roseanne Archibald. I call for action immediately on a resolution that was passed in December 2019. It was passed in Ottawa. And to the Prime Minister of Canada, I say it's fine and wonderful for you to go and seek an apology from the Pope, but the real work is here in Canada.
Last summer, Poundmaker's Lodge said some remains have been found using ground-penetrating radar, and more exploration will be conducted. The AFN has refused to comment on the story. The Prime Minister's office referred APTN's inquiry to Minister Heido's office at Indigenous Services Canada. Her office has not responded before airtime. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, St. Albert.
To Ukraine now, as fighting intensifies near the capital, the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, says that his city will never surrender.
We never ever go to the knee. Better we died and give up. And that's why the Russians never, I tell you as mayor of Kyiv, as citizens of Kyiv, the Russians will be never ever in our hometown.
Smoke was seen rising from a residential area near Kyiv after heavy shelling today. Local residents say some people who were injured have already been evacuated. They didn't provide details on how many people were hurt or their condition. Much worse situation in Mariupol, much of which has been destroyed. Ukraine's deputy prime minister says another attempt will be made today to get civilians out. This news comes as the city council says there have been 300 people maybe killed in the last week's Russian bombing of a theater that's being used as a shelter for residents. This new video taken inside the theater moments after the attack, as people covered in dust and debris walk away stunned. A man can be heard saying that a rocket hit right in the center of the building. It's believed as many as 1,000 people, mostly women and children, were sheltering inside. Well, Nunavut is coming up on an important milestone in their efforts to fight COVID-19. Some restrictions are going away, but what is that going to mean for one of Nunavut's communities facing two big health crises? Here's a look at a story that we will be bringing you soon.
I'm Kent Driscoll in Iqaluit. On Monday, Nunavut is set to ease up on most of the remaining COVID-19 restrictions. Panikto is a Baffin Island community of around 1,500 people, where there were 47 active COVID-19 cases at the beginning of the week. Now the mayor is saying there's also 28 cases of active tuberculosis in the small community. So many cases, they're planning on using the community hall as a TB screening clinic. we'll look at what happens in a Nunavut community when one health crisis hits it on top of another. That's next week, here on APTN National News.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Jason Kershane sent in this picture to remind us as the seasons change, there are some great days ahead. Jason is looking forward to a summer spent on the lakes of Manitoba with friends and family, just like we're seeing here. Thanks you for this, Jason. You can send your photos to share at aptn.ca, and your photo just might be chosen to be our next photo of the day. Let's take a look now at tomorrow's not quite so summer weather forecast.
Off to the east coast, we've got 5 in showers for St. John's, sunshine, and 12 in Halifax. Nain, -1, and snow. Kuujjuaq, sunshine, 2 degrees there. Saguenay, snow is expected, 1 degree. Same with you in Val-d'Or and Rwanda. Cloud and 6 for Ottawa. Toronto, 6 degrees. You may even get some flurries. -10 and snow for Kapuskasing. Big Trout Lake, -16 and snow expected. Sunshine for northern Manitoba. Puckatawaga, -16. God's Lake, -12. Continues down south, -11 for Winnipeg and Dauphin. Sunny and 6 for Swift Current. Sunny and -7 for Yorkton. -13 for La Rage and sunshine. Same with you. Sunny in Stony Rapids, but -16. -7 and flurries expected for you in High Level. Fort Chip, -13 and cloud. Sunny for Red Deer, 6 degrees expected. 10 for Medicine Hat and Calgary, sunny there. 15 and cloud for Kamloops. Quesnel, 9, you get cloud too. 0 and a chance of snow for Fort Nelson. Sunshine, and 3 in Dease Lake. 2 and sunny for Whitehorse. Mayo and Dawson City, both 2 with a chance of flurries. Wrigley, you're getting snow, -11 degrees. Yellowknife, cloud, -17. Inuvik, -18 and sunshine. Palatec, -21 and sunny. Chesterfield, -20 and snow. Whale Cove and Arviat both get a chance of flurries and -23. Sunshine and -23 for Arctic Bay. Snow and -19 for Clyde River.
There is a new option in the Yukon for swearing an oath in court. The territory recently introduced eagle feathers as an alternative to the Bible. 10 feathers will be available in courtrooms across the territory. They are part of a series of initiatives aimed at making the law courts more culturally inclusive for Yukon First Nations people. Council of Yukon First Nations Grand Chief Peter Johnston says the territory is just one of the last jurisdictions in Canada to include eagle feathers in the courtroom, and that this is a positive step towards reconciliation.
This opportunity now gives the person that is caught in this reality an alternative to the Bible. So I think the eagle feather is obviously a very powerful symbolism to First Nations. You know, the eagle is looked upon as free.
Well, that is a wrap on your news for tonight. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thanks for joining us. I'll be back here tomorrow with your APTN Weekend News. We'll see you then.